Hey y'all, today's video is a 15-minute demo on this little still life. I'm going to show you some of my favorite themes and ideas to talk about when it comes to painting with acrylics. So I very briefly want to go over a tiny bit of housekeeping first. If you want to see the reference photo, I've put it down in the show notes below. I recommend if you want to watch and sort of make notes of what I'm painting, you can reference that. You can also use the reference photo I've supplied and paint it yourself. All I ask is if you post it to social media, if you could just tag me. Credit goes a long way for working artists. Thank you so much. And I also wanted to say that the first part of this was filmed during a live demo, so there's quite a bit of hand waving. I will say I edited out the vast majority, but if a couple of them slip through, that's what's going on. Okay, anyways, let's just jump right in. So the main thing I'm going to talk about today is this idea called general to specific. And it's the idea that as you work through a painting, I think this is applicable to a lot of different mediums, but as you work through a painting, you're going to become more specific with what you're depicting, the details you include, the brush marks you include as you work through the painting. And I really think that painting with acrylics exemplifies this pretty well. I will say I do this with my oils, but I tend to paint more a la prima, and I feel like the most exaggerated version of painting from general to specific happens whenever I use my acrylics, which is what I'm using today. So the first way I implement this rule is with my initial drawing. You'll notice that a lot of painters, especially painters who use different approaches and styles, will put a lot of consideration into their initial drawing. Some people will do something like a graphite transfer, some people will grid, others will use a projector. Certainly those are all things that you can use and there's nothing wrong with it. Those tools wouldn't help me too much because I am not wanting to really find any detail. In fact, I remember in my demo telling my students to think of this more like scaffolding, less like a drawing. It really should not feel like a contour drawing or any kind of drawing at all. You're going to paint over all of it probably, and so the way it needs to function is it needs to give you just enough information that whenever you go in during the step I'm showing you right now, it's enough of a guideline that it shows you where to put paint, but it's not so detailed that you're being bogged down or you're just going to cover it all up. I guess it's good practice. You could be really detailed and covered it up. It wouldn't really hurt anything. But I say that a really important part of this particular approach to painting that's helpful is quickly working through this initial step. So it's important to point out here that I am painting with a size 12 brush. Size 12 relative to this, I believe 8x10 canvas is pretty jumbo. I always tell my students when they do this block-in step to pick a brush that's 1 or maybe 2 sizes bigger than what you feel comfortable with. Choose a big brush and then size up. Basically, you want to give yourself no ability to paint detail, especially because if you're painting with a flat or a bright, you really can't, and that's what that brush does. Here I'm actually showing the color globe. I love this tool because color really has 3 dimensions. Value is 1 dimension, hue, and then chroma. Color wheel really only shows you hue and chroma. And I believe I'm talking my students through, how do I choose what white to paint for this napkin? Because it's not titanium white. It's quite a bit darker. And the way that I think of it is it's just a very, very light, low intensity, white is a neutral after all, version of any other color. And for the napkin, it ended up being kind of a peachy color. But as we can see in this block and that I'm almost completed with, actually, it came together pretty quickly. I have everything here sped up to, I think, 5 times speed, if that helps for context. I think this painting took me, in total, maybe 3.5, 4 hours-ish. I probably would have taken closer to 2.5, 3 if I had just painted and wasn't teaching while I was painting. But, this first step always comes together really quickly. In fact, when I do these demos in person, people are both kind of, I would say, equal parts horrified and delighted by how quickly these come together. And I say horrified because they're really, it's pretty rough. It's very rustic, if I can use a euphemism. And that's fine. So much of this is going to get covered back up. The way I think of it is whenever you have that underpainting, the initial color, for me it was pink. A lot of people will prime their canvases with burnt sienna. Certainly if you start with white, it's really hard to make good value and color choices on that background, even with the drawing. And so I give myself the grace to say, why don't I get things 75% of the way there? Why don't I get things 85% of what I think they'll look like in the finished piece? even less sometimes. And then after that, I can better make color and value choices, because the nature of color is that it's contextual, which just means that the colors around whatever you're painting are going to inform what the right color is. People get really hung up on the right color, and there's a concept called local color, which is like the exact color of what you're looking at. That's great. That should be like something you're aiming towards, especially if you're learning. But it's not the end all be all, because you might mix what feels like the perfect color for your reference photo, but you put it down on your canvas, and your canvas basically needs to be its own world, its own language. And you put it on there, you think you've mixed the perfect orange juice color, you put it on there, and you realize it needs to be much redder in order for it to make sense in the context of everything else, And so being able to sort of pivot and make those adjustments is really important. I think at this point I have sized down in my brushes, so I'm working with a size 6, so I'm able to get way more specificity here with this brush. You feel so agile when you have it after painting with that big beastly size 12 for so long. It's still, I believe, a flat, so I don't have like a nice little point. I really don't paint with brushes that have that. Some people do. It's fine. It's no big deal. But I like making big chunky statements. Pretty much my whole painting process. I will just size down brush if I really need something kind of specific. But as you can see, I'm getting more and more specific. I'm also getting more accurate. So when I do this next round of evaluation, I'm doing two things. One, I'm cleaning up sort of where my big brush was like a bull in a china shop. It just sort of tore through everything, was too big to, do the details on the blueberries. I'm cleaning that up. It also sometimes will mess with your drawing. A lot of times the big brush messes up your drawing, but also like you learn your composition more and you can correct it. Like I always feel like I would spend forever on my initial drawing if I was locked in to my drawing that I did the first go, because I feel like what happens for me is I'll do that initial drawing and then I'll paint on it for a while. And then I'll be like, oh, the bowl is too small. Like that was my error. And then I'll be able to fix it. And since I'm layering and the acrylic is so opaque, I can do that. And it's not too hard of a process. I just sort of adjust things and move them around. I was also telling my students during this demo that this is a great process, because if you mess up, I think it just adds to this painting. So I really like using acrylics. I use a lot of heavy body, which just makes it a little more textured. You can kind of see the brush marks. And between the way that medium works, where it's kind of builds up and you can see brush marks, and the fact that I'm sort of layering, and you can see here I'm going back again with the base color, the color of the blue construction paper. I'm going back in again, and you might be thinking, oh, you're undoing all your work. But when you get up close to it, especially in person, all of that brushwork and the layering, it looks really cool. I actually kind of pride myself in the fact that a lot of times people assume my paintings are oil. I do paint in both acrylic and oil, but when people, there's sometimes a bit of snobbery around acrylic. And I will say it comes from a place where acrylic, if not handled well, can look very flat, especially like a soft body acrylic. But I pride myself in having people assume that they're looking at oil, especially when they see it in person and it has so much character and texture. And what they're actually looking at is acrylic. But part of what makes it look like that is my mistakes. Like I always tell my students whenever I do retreats and workshops, I always start off by saying, listen, this is a place where your mistakes are not only tolerated, but welcomed. And I don't say that as a platitude or just some tongue in cheek, like I want you to relax and loosen up. Like, yes, I hope you relax. I hope you enjoy yourself. I hope you feel safe here. But also, I mean it. I totally mean it. Like, moving things around, like sometimes what'll happen is like, I'll have to move this orange juice cup 2 inches, let's say, a pretty dramatic move. And, there'll be some orange left over in where the blueberries are now. And I would have never thought to do that on my own, to add little bits of orange to something, for example. And it'll make a little bit of it will make it into the finished piece. And then someone will comment either in person or online. I'll be like, oh, it's so smart to put the little pops of orange around the blueberry. It's like so lovely and contrasty. How did you think of that? And like most of the time, it's just because I made a mistake. I totally messed up. I for myself, I call this like playing ping pong with the universe. Like I am just like a human who makes flaws. Like it's instead of like being so sad about it, I found a style that makes it no big deal if I need to go fix something. And the inevitability of me messing up or, not quite thinking through something means that I have then a chance to solve it in a way where if I had been singularly focused on perfecting it right out of the gate, I may have missed the opportunity to add that texture or those colors or, choices that end up being really interesting. Okay, anyways, back to specific. You can see here now I'm going in and I'm mixing a few different shades of this white of the napkin. I'm leaving some of the initial block in places, and in some places I'm covering. You don't have to cover everything up. Like sometimes you get things right out of the gate, and you just can kind of add to it. Other times things need overhaul. But you can see the napkin I summarized initially as like one color, and now I'm finding all these little variations, and you can sort of see like crinkles in the napkin. And so things that feel like they're really, really specific, I'm able to go in and paint them in because I've already done so much of the work beforehand. And I'm really just kind of putting the finishing touches, the highlights. When I get to the highlights, I always know I'm like within striking distance. I actually think I jumped the gun on this a little bit. I try to save highlights for the very, very end, and I already put some in on the blueberries. And you can see my cup of orange juice still has a way to go. I will say I do kind of like the cup of orange juice when it's like a little under rendered. As I've grown as an artist and become a little less, one thing that new artists tend to do is they get really hung up on perfection, making it look perfectly representational. And the older I get, it's been really liberating, but the more I kind of like things a little undercooked, not all the time. Sometimes my undercooked ideas are terrible, but like this orange juice cup, I kind of wish I would have like stopped here and taken a nice photo of it or something. But, I kind of like the way, not just me, but I see other people do this too, where they're just kind of in problem solving mode and not perfecting mode. They're not perfecting anything. And I sometimes think that the statements you make during that kind of game can be quite a bit lovelier than when you're trying to polish something. I don't know, we're getting a little esoteric. But we can see here now I've moved down to a teeny tiny brush. I think it's like a size 0 or a size 1 if I'm not mistaken. Yes, still a flat. I wasn't kidding. But I'm going in and doing these tiny little statements on here and just really getting in the little bits of detail that I would have never been able to get with the bigger brushes. But I would say that only maybe about 10, 15% of the surface of my canvas even gets treated with this small brush. I try to leave as many big statements as I can. I think they're pretty lovely. And a lot of them are pretty correct. So I don't have the need to go in and really refine or fix things. But I certainly could if I wanted to. That's kind of the nice thing about moving down in brush size as you go. So yeah, hopefully this was fun to watch, guys. I'm putting in the last little bits right here. Hopefully you gained something. Let me know if you guys have any questions. And I hope you enjoyed this demo. And if anyone's here from the Opus group, I promised I said I'd get this up, and I did. So hopefully that was fun to watch it all come together. Thank you for your patience. Take care and happy creating.